there. So basically, the board allows us to create topics. You're interested in a particular topic or question, you can actually type your question here. And if other people want to add, there's this plus button, which will add another opportunity or available. And for the new people joining us, this is a lean community of practice for Edmonton. And sometimes we get Calgary folks joining as well because we share our invite with them. And we're happy to facilitate these sessions every third Friday of the month. First off, ask Greg about the 8 wastes. So we'll put that on the discussion board.
So, okay, 8 wastes. So yeah, that, as I mentioned, that was one of the ones we found a little bit tough. I think if anything, it just speaks mainly in some ways to having to do this lateral jump, right, from manufacturing into a design office. So maybe I'll just like work through some of those. I'll just walk through the 8 of them really quickly of kind of how we made that leap. So as far as defects go, that's kind of an obvious one, I guess, for us. It would generally be wrong information that would be going to a consultant, that could be going to a job site. And so it would be something that was incorrect that would lead to problems down the line. And, you know, we already have a lot of processes for trying to catch that, but of course, it's constantly possible to make it. So that's defects. Overproduction is a really common one. And I think that's very much what I was thinking about when I talked about us having deliverables based work and not needing to like turn a deliverable into more than it has to be, or more than like what the best thing, you know, the best value thing it could have, right? So that it can do what it needs to do as a deliverable. And so overproduction too can come into play when we have big changes like in a design or in feedback from the consultants that forces us to reconsider stuff. I think it's definitely, it's a thing that we can both improve, but there's always going to be some of it just as a reflection of the design process not being linear, and that it is going to kind of go to and fro and stuff. And there, but we can get it minimized, I would say, for sure. Waiting is a common one for us, and also kind of unavoidable in some ways, because waiting for building permits or development permits, waiting for maybe the client to get some information or do some things they need to do, or waiting for consultants to finish something. We can try to optimize this a bit, but some of those processes are just inherent. And so trying to work in a way that the waiting doesn't upset our flow too much, I think that's a really, you know, thing we can be aware of and be thinking about. Non-utilized talent is true for us too. It's a straightforward one. It's just making sure that people are in the office, you know, doing the things they're strongest at. And yeah, we really have like great people with great skills in different areas. And so I think for us, it's been good to just be conscientious about that as we're going forward with stuff. Transportation is one that doesn't strongly fit for us. I mean, if we're going back and forth from a job site for some reason to be checking on it more, or needing to take a thing over somewhere else, maybe mailing it, you know, we could spend a half hour in the afternoon doing it, or maybe drop it off on the way home or something. So that's kind of a minor one, but there's ways we can be good about it. Inventory is pretty weird for us because we don't have that kind of thing, but generally like office supplies would count. And arguably like having like software licenses for things we barely use or something would be like a waste because we're paying for that and we're not using it. And it might kind of fit into this inventory category. Motion, I guess, oh, I guess I said that for transportation, but yeah, motion would just be, there you go. Maybe we have to constantly get up and go to the supply cabinet instead of bringing like everything we need to do some design drawings in the first go, right? So that would be a example. And job site visits, being like smart about scheduling them and doing all that would definitely fit into motion, because I mean, we had a project on the, I don't know, 40-minute drive from our office this year enough. And so it was like, okay, maybe probably more than that actually. And so it's just being smart about when you go and how many times you go and all of that. And then finally, extra processing. So, oh, that might sort of fit into the overproduction as I'm looking at it. It has been a while, I'll admit, since I've looked through these. But yeah, I would, what I said for overproduction counts for extra processing too. So, yeah.
And that's just over 3 minutes. I'm impressed how you went through downtime, like bang, bang, bang. Uh, shall I add 3 more minutes to the clock? I can't see everyone's video, so you can either use the um, like thumbs up reaction button, or you can turn on your video and give me the thumbs up. But I'd love to hear anyone else's thoughts on the 8 ways within
thumbs up for that.
architectural practice. Looking at you, Karen. Or
yeah, no problem. I was gonna say, yeah, I had a few things to add to some of those categories that one of our team members pointed out. So sorry, I'm with an architecture firm along with RPK Architects. So,
yes,
and we've been doing training with Avel and Shafraz as well. So one of our team members pointed out transportation waste is not necessarily just about like physical items, you know, shop drawings, physically moving and stuff, but he pointed out that every time we transfer a file between a different software that's a transportation waste. So, you know, maybe we're working in Revit and then we bring it into, you know, Enscape and then, you know, like, but having to go back and forth. And we actually found that we were doing some really unproductive transportation of our projects electronically. So that was some really interesting insight that came forward. And then there was another one that you said, oh, inventory. When I think of inventory, because we don't have a lot of physical inventory, our product isn't really, you know, we don't produce products in some ways, but it's having just work in progress that's not finished. And I am like the worst at that. I always have tons of little things I'm halfway through, and you know, not finishing them is an inventory waste. So yeah, those are just some things that, you know, we've sort of learned about how these translate to the architecture field. Mm-hmm.
Nice. Yeah, those are awesome. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I'll bring those back with me, because that's so true about the file. That's stuff, I've done too much of that myself and suffered through it. So
let's see here. So we can push that into discussed, and we can now slip into how can we find, whoops, did I do the right one? This one. How have you learned? What are the high-level steps to implement lean? Or what have you learned?
Yeah. All good. So in our office, I would say the most important high-level step has been those morning meetings as a switch from this kind of weekly death meeting of forever and slow and whatever, because it's definitely, I think without a doubt been the biggest thing to improve flow for us. And also, I mean, communication's so key in all of these lean processes. So especially with working remote, that's been this major way of doing that for us. And without it, I don't really know how things would have gone. But because we've had that, it's been this way of doing that. I guess related to that, we have been having like monthly full office meetings now for kind of strategic planning / this being it. Well, I guess not, I shouldn't say strategic planning. Sometimes there's been those with us involved and we had them before, but often now those have become a way to like discuss office processes or things that, you know, we had a few that were mainly really just team building things, talking about more personal stuff. And I mean, it's great as an office we're even able to do that as the exact group of people that we are, and I guess we feel comfortable with it. But yeah, that's been huge, because it's kind of meant that even though maybe it's been, I couldn't put numbers to it, but it's not the full team that's been like enthusiastically pushing that we do lean stuff. And so because we've been doing these meetings and we've had these other opportunities, the people that are seeing the success with lean practices and wanting to, at minimum, continue with the practices that they're having success with, so me included, then it becomes a way to kind of advocate for it and discuss it as part of these broader things. And I think I would say that attitude of continuous improvement's definitely there. So any friction we've had with lean is maybe more around like specific ways of looking at it or specific practices, and less some of the overall idea of flow I think everyone's on board with, and the overall idea of continuous improvement everyone's on board with. So it's kind of like, yeah, that would be my thoughts on it. So the biggest thing would be those meetings. Like, yeah, I can't really see anything else of working quite the way it did if we didn't have that. And then also that like evolution toward these mini meetings, because that didn't necessarily even happen intentionally. It just kind of evolved as having these morning check-ins and then leading into that. And we kind of became aware that it was good and working and that we should keep doing it. So, and I guess that's one way you could say we kind of leaned our actual design process a little bit, because, you know, none of us in this office are working in a vacuum, and everyone is, at minimum, you're going to have two people involved in a design process on a project, the one doing most of the designing and the person providing oversight. And so I guess in this lean way, instead of spending 5 hours and showing 5 hours worth of sketches, maybe you spend 2 hours, do a 15-minute check-in, get the feedback on how to develop those sketches in other directions. And then, you know, then you do an hour that time and you've only spent 3 instead of 5 to get it from start to finish. So that's been a good thing too.
The rest are a bunch of ties with 1 vote each. We'll just start from the top then. How can we find a better way to engage more lean practices?
Shiraz, that's me. It's Cherry.
Okay.
So
introduce it.
so this question is basically not just for Greg, who's starting out with lean. Great presentation, by the way. I just wanted to let you know. But for everybody else. So, I mean, during at this time, I'm always very, very curious about always engagement and in regards to participating in many leans, and how do you influence that and make sure that you keep that engagement going. So, Greg, if you want to start us off, for sure, of how you get everybody engaged, so you can certainly do that.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll just shoot from the hip, and I think my knee-jerk answer to this is if we're bringing that attitude of the continuous improvement and achieving flow to everything, then we might even be coming up with new practices as we go, essentially, right? And so, you know, how this eventually looks in a design office should be different from manufacturing. I would expect that it would be at least a little bit different. And so I think, to me, like, those are maybe the most critical attitudes. I'm sure someone else would differ, but I think bringing that, I guess, perspective to the work we're doing would be the first step, and a good step in that direction for more lean practices. Yeah.
Karen, did you want to comment? Your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to actually echo what Greg had actually said on the previous topic about the daily meetings. I think that in whatever practice you're in, whether it's architecture or construction or some other enterprise, I think that those are really important. So we had started our lean training before the pandemic hit, and we had started the rigor of morning meetings. We don't do the whole office because we're just a bit bigger of an office, but we do it on a project team basis. So the whole project team gets together every morning. And we found that that we had established that. And then when COVID hit and everyone had to work from home, then we were able to continue that. And that was just such a blessing that we had already established that rigor, because I think our projects would have just all kind of fallen apart and fizzled. And but just to have that daily communication about, you know, what is the priority that I'm working on today? Is there anything that anyone needs from me? That even just that alone, like, even if you aren't able to engage people in other aspects, you know, like the complex full planning or something like that, because maybe there's resistance, but just that communication, I've found to be really effective in our office. Yeah.
For sure. And I think one thing we always encourage is taking dedicated time every week. So whether it's 15 minutes or more, just to instill that kind of habit forming, or you know, working on fixing something that isn't working for you in a lean way, or using lean tools. When you give people some time to really test out and even fail at things, that's sort of the cultural aspect, that it shows that there's a way that you're serious about it the company is really trying to build on this and so forth. Cool. So setting the clock for the next one. Any tips from the crowd on making the process of learning pull planning less overwhelming? Who asked this one, and would they like to introduce?
This is from me. So, you know, similar to Greg, because of the process we've been going through with our training, we've attempted to learn how to pull plan. I would say it's certainly a learning process that is still in process. But one thing is it just seems like it's such a big task and a big learning thing. Like it really seems like it's hard to keep people engaged in it because it just is so overwhelming. I mean, myself included, even though, you know, I'm one of our lean champions. And I mean, I guess Brian had to sign off, unfortunately, but I mean, you know, with PCL, they do a lot of pull planning. So it's not even just about, you know, the architecture people on this call, but like just anyone who's doing pull planning. Like, are there ways to ease your way into it, I guess, so that it's more palatable to everybody and doesn't just put them off because it's just so overwhelming? So just wondering if people had any thoughts on that.
Yes, because in a sense, like I did this myself, like I did it in ways for the projects I was on to make it less overwhelming for me. And because we had some leeway to do that, it was, you know, it really speaks to the small size of the projects too, right? But I would say the things that helped us when we had them be less overwhelming was the small size of project for sure was a massive help, that we weren't, everything that I've used them on wasn't huge. And I think it benefited from that in a funny way, maybe. We were kind of forgiving with ourselves eventually, not at first, but eventually when it came to the granularity about what level of task to write down for the pull plans. Instead, because I think that we had a lot of like, oh my God, we have to put everything, or do we only put these high level things and whatever. And it was just better once we didn't do that and just kind of put what felt natural maybe. And I think also it was probably good that it was projects with very few people on them for us too, to just get familiar with it, because then there was less, you didn't need as many people having to be on top of it. You could just have a few. And then I guess the other thing, I forgot to mention it, but in the process of developing that, the online course, we had a pull plan for it. And that pull plan has actually turned into essentially our meeting agenda. So for our weekly project meeting for that, and you know what, actually this has happened on other ones too, now that I think about it, we, on our like a project check-in meeting, basically we just open up the pull plan and go through any things we finished, if they haven't already been flagged as finished by the person doing them, and check what the next wave of things you are like as a team. And so that's actually, I think the course is actually the first time we've had a larger number of people doing one of these, and it's been working moderately well that way. But almost just like not trying to get it right has helped. And even like, I don't know if it's even a proper pull plan anymore because the dates are a little bit crazy or they go a little bit sideways, but it's definitely proper as far as like documenting all the tasks and a general order in which they're going to be done in. So, yeah.
One thing I did yesterday, Gem Cabinets, we were doing our pull planning training actually. Avel and I suggested for the exercise that each person think of a project they're working on and take the hour we were, you know, testing pull planning to think it through in their own minds and develop all of the people involved. It surprisingly worked really well because they all came up with projects that were 3 months or less that they had a personal involvement on. So you could see their swim lane with all of the tasks pretty developed. But when they had to start to think through other people's tasks, it actually kind of made them really recognize the, you know, start with the end in mind part and how that really related to other people, and actually got them to start to think when they should pull that information and question whether or not they were quite doing it right in the first place. So actually, I'm going to try and test that out more often with people. Just do that first. There's our timer. Do that sort of thought experiment with themselves, and then take them to a bigger group setting to pull it. So we shall see how that works.
Okay, good to know.
Any other comments, questions on how to make the process less? and frankly, sometimes it's good just to dive in the deep end, to be honest. So, okay.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. Even though I know it caused frustration in the office, I think it was good and right for us to have that messy one just go bad or just be what it was before then being able to do these more simple ones. I think it's just like, yeah, it was, I don't know. I thought it was useful. Not everyone, but.
Yeah, you got to fail sometimes.
Yeah,
exactly. You learn from
exactly.
your mistakes. Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. I'll put the next one on the board. Has there been any experience of conflicts between lean processes and the creative process? Ooh, good one. Anyone?
I feel like no, because we haven't let there be, and it's because we prioritize the creative process, which is probably the least surprising answer I could give. But I'll be interested to see in the future, I suppose. It's kind of like, yeah, I mean, there's like, I don't know how to answer this in some ways. Like the architectural creative process is bizarre, for lack of a better way of putting it, because you know, you're going to go do some sketch and the sketch is going to show a blue wall, maybe with some little squares on it or something. And depending on who did that sketch, they're going to imagine some like fuzzy wall made of textiles for acoustic, or someone else might think it's glossy tile. And then when you're actually selecting that stuff might be like 6 months after that sketch was done. And so like it's a very, and like that might be actually very wrong if it happens that way, or very right or situation dependent, right? So it's kind of like how the lean processes interact with the creative processes is like very messy already, or potentially very messy already, I should say. It doesn't mean that it will be. So I don't know. I think that's a tough one to answer.
Not necessarily. Like I think that the conflicts are, again, only when they need time to really work on something that is creating disruption in the flow, I find.
Yeah, that's true. And I think like, yeah. Oh, sorry, continue.
Even as you said, Greg, it's sort of encouraging people to fail a little bit, or waste a little bit of time, or not waste, but take the time to try and learn this. Like it's always the struggle of convincing people this is an investment of their time.
Yeah.
It's something that isn't working, and if you put in the time up front and you figure out a better way, then that's the goal.
Well, and that's, yeah, I think that's super true. And I mean, for me, the thing with design, so much of it is like you have to, like every good design has like 5 bad designs that were drawn on the way to getting to the good one. And I think that's a rough, like that's not, I mean, first year students hate that, the idea that they're being forced to do a process instead of just make their idea. And I think the industry in a sense hates that, because you're spending, hopefully not 5 times as much time, but you're spending a lot more time to do these failures to get to the thing that works and to get a better sense of the whole thing. And so if you go in knowing that and you kind of factor that in to the flow of the overall thing, then it's actually fine, because you just kind of, there's no failure really. It's like part of the process and you're expecting it to be part of the process. But when that becomes seen as like unnecessary to do this other work, when really it's actually super necessary, I think that's when you get into, but it's almost like a false conflict, I guess, as opposed to like a necessarily actual one. You just have to like let design be what it is, and be critical about it too, because there's always like better and worse ways of trying to design, and like tools to, types of sketching, when does it make sense to make a SketchUp model versus when does it make sense not to, or to use a 6B pencil and have some really rough hazy thing versus, the fine black line drawing and all its high fidelity, right? So yeah, I think that's I mean, that's been actually for me, that's been really interesting because I've had a few design projects after our lean training that have pushed me into corners I'm really unfamiliar with. The one I had on the slide was this crazy facade thing that needed way more color than I'm used to working with. And a different one, we were doing working on a tower proposal, and I've never worked on anything of that scale. So you'd end up just taking a lot of time to do sketches in a way that it doesn't when you're doing a 2-story building, or not in quite the same way. So that was both of those was a very interesting, like, okay, how is a smart way of designing going to happen with these so that it works? And yeah.
Yeah, and it's true. It's about allowing the time for design. That's where the value is, and I think that's also the good thing about maybe you know, ensuring lean culture is about finding the more opportune times to design when you have all of the other, you know, non-value work you're minimizing, or you're standardizing, or you're even just cleaning up that process. It allows you that time to move forward.
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, one of the many theories about the history of design is that like the first design discipline was actually pottery, where they were making these molds for for pottery essentially. And so it's a craft process, right? So it involves this period of design, but then once you've designed it, you're repeating it. And in a sense, what we're often losing in architecture is that repetition. But the thing that we're able to repeat is the ways of working and doing the designing, and some of the same, you know, details across buildings. Maybe some of the knowledge gets repeated, but it's still, you know, it's not mutually exclusive at all. It's just different than the actual, you know, cranking out copies of this thing once you built the template. Yeah.
Totally. Okay, I'm gonna put this on the discussed column. Paper-free architecture and construction environments. Are we close? Or how close are we?
Oh yeah, man. We're not close at all, but that's fine. There's like, I'm so torn about it because there's things about it I love and things that are just not gonna jive. And so I think a couple key things, you know, once it's even cheaper, that, you know, your Microsoft Surface, I have one of those, I like them, it's fine, but it's still nothing like, you know, 6B pencil on paper. And so when that technology gets a bit closer to, say, like a Cintiq tablet that feels a bit more like you're really drawing on the thing, I think you'll get even more willingness to do a design process in that as opposed to on the drafting board. And for people that use those in their industry, it's already happened. So you look at all of like contemporary comic drawing and like manga in Japan and stuff, and it's all done on those. And it's actually crazy to see the people working with Photoshop because they're like resizing eyes and adding hair, and like it's bizarre. It's kind of cyborg drawing. But I think that's one half. And until that day, I'm going to be using rolls and rolls of trace paper, hopefully recycled paper, to work through all of that. But as far as later phases in it, I don't know. It's interesting. I love the promise of the kind of BIM model on site of the building thing, but it's a long, like, there's just the software isn't great for it. So you have lots of ways in which that, and then of course everyone using different softwares, including the actual fabrication some of the time if you're, you know, running a CNC machine or something. So I think there's just so many barriers, but they're not insurmountable. So that's my feeling. Like I'm interested, interested, but like I'll always have the paper sketchbook with the rough pencils though. That's the, yeah, for the early phase, but it doesn't need to be in there later, I think.
All right. Any other perspectives on paperless? I have to say, I left behind a desk where I was piling papers and stacks of correspondence years ago to try and become paperless. And I found that it actually helped my outlook. It cleared my head because I didn't come to a desk that had piles of paper kind of, you know, a foot high surrounding me. And it actually made me show, like, I should just figure out a better way to file things.
Well, and, you know, it's funny. I should say I actually am working in a highly paperless way on that front. So most documents I'm dealing with are PDFs, and I'm marking them up, and happy to be doing that in both cases. So It's yeah, it's funny. I don't think of it that way, but actually it's highly paperless right now. And with me not being in the office, I'm also not doing print offs for the physical markups. I'm just marking up PDFs, usually using the Surface, which actually does pretty good with the pen. But yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Mike Good here, project manager, and yeah, from my perspective, like working from the owner side, I've always I've got an iPad Pro, and doing any kind of drawing markup, I download the PDF, do all the markups right on the PDF, and then I can just send it straight from my iPad. It's awesome. And like I'm also doing school as well, like upgrading and stuff like that. And pretty much all of my courses, I have all my course notes on the iPad Pro, and it's huge because I mean, you know, from the you know, sustainable resource side of things, you're not wasting paper, you're not wasting toner or ink, or you don't even need a printer anymore, let alone an actual plotter for full size for full size sheets or anything like that. So it's awesome from the sustainability side of things, but also I find it's quicker to, you know, have a overall drawing up on the computer and then have a blown up section on your iPad, and it's killer. So
awesome. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I hope we're moving in that direction. I know my son and his generation, he hates writing on paper. So he's, in fact, I think the next generation will totally abandon it, unfortunately.
Well, even me, I was furious back in, I don't know, forever ago, high school, having to manually write paper, or, you know, the whatever diploma exams or something. Because at that time I was already online enough to be typing super fast from programming and whatever else, that the idea that I'm like causing physical pain in my hand to try to do this thing fast enough was infuriating when I could just crank it out on the keyboard.
Sherry, did you have a question or?
No, I just wanted to add a comment about writing papers, because I'll tell you this right now, having everything digital is what we're all moving into. But I think for one, writing something down still is very accurate, because I wanted to share a little bit of my success. I just passed my CAPM this past 6 months of studying and everything, and the tools that I have done was that I had to write down terms in flashcards and do that back and forth, and just, you know, I had to write everything down. Basically, those are 700 terms, and believe me, when my hand has been like numb and sore just writing all that terms, but I was certainly encouraged to do that, to go over it, because physically you can certainly learn things when you're reading it down instead of online. Because you know, what I'm seeing is that if you don't do it the old natural way of writing things down and you do it online, you somehow can't go ahead and memorize it better when you actually do have it in your hand. So there's still some great benefits of writing things down, especially when you're trying to study or learn new stuff. So I wouldn't, you know, not bet on that one just yet. So
yeah, it's why I gave the example of the writing at paper too, just because I'm always physically writing too. If I'm like probably I think planning this talk too, anything that involves like memorizing, planning, like thinking through an idea, it's all like physical writing, because it slows you down in such a useful way to, as you say, like feel it come out of your hand as you're writing the words and thinking them over.
Absolutely, Greg. And you know what? That's also what I do. When I have to go ahead and lay out my day when I was working, you know, I write everything down in a notebook, and I have this big pile of notebook of this date, and these are my priorities that I write down. You know, it's great to have a technical, like, you know, so many tools to utilize how you plan your day, but nothing certainly feels even more better to actually go ahead and look at down to your notebook and say, oh, I have to go ahead and do that, but yet somehow I can't, you know, I'll miss it online. So let's not eliminate so much of that just yet. So that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
let's carry on. We just have a couple more topics. Gamba walks. Do you do them?
Someone's gonna have to tell me what this is. I'm sorry to say. I'm sure we got told in the lean training, but
So
like the inspection of the workplace thing or something.
Yeah, I'll just give you a little bit of what I knew, because I
Thanks.
used to do Gemba walks for sure. Because when I did used to work in manufacturing, in a manufacturing sense sectors, we usually have a daily meetings that, yes, each of us are basically going around in certain areas of the plant to actually have a meeting and specifically discuss certain issues or concerns regarding an order. What are the issues that have arisen, why a certain order didn't was late, or was there any issues, and were there any bottlenecks, that what did we do to make it better. So yeah, Gemba walks is certainly like a production status meeting kind of a thing, right, Shafraz?
yeah, it's going to the work where the work happens. So I was gonna try and clarify, does this mean really just walking around your colleagues and seeing what they're working? Or, obviously in architecture and design, sometimes, our work is at the construction site and going directly to the very end product of our work. And yes, absolutely doing that. So
Yeah, I mean, yeah, with us, I think that's for sure, especially the construction site. I think within the office, we're probably all doing it a little bit passively, but now that we're not in the office, that kind of makes that even less of a thing. So in a way, it's maybe more of a parallel than actually what this is. But I think the times that we've initiated and then had or followed up with like formal discussions around our processes, because like they're so often pretty intangible between maybe multiple softwares or the flow of documents or something. That's probably like the closest we've gotten maybe to the spirit of this, if not the actual task. Yeah.
how about during COVID? Do you screen share a lot?
Oh yeah, we do for sure. But it's probably mainly still just sharing a document and less discussing a process. But actually, so I mentioned it in the talk, but the whole kind of the way the pull planning thing went with us at one of those larger monthly meetings, those of us using it kind of advocated for it as the way that we would continue, especially because those of us using it were doing more project management-y stuff than other people were. And so of course we had a bit more say in that. And so that led into like a series of spin-off meetings, I guess, about walking some other people through that process and how we could then maybe make sure other people in the office gave it a shot as well. So it was very much like a process-focused discussion throughout all of it.
Okay, and, cool. Last point then to talk, do you do strategic planning? I'm not sure.
But not me, really. So yeah, our principal Cynthia is very on the ball about that, I would say. Like she schedules off, I think, at least one Friday a month or one day a month as a strategic planning day. And we will, I think it's quarterly, we'll do a full office discussion about that. And certainly like we'll have a lot of more informal discussions around some of that too. But yeah, generally that's very much on her as the sole principal of the office. And we're, there to provide input and feedback and whatever, but it's very much, I'm not directly involved in it. And then I guess there is like another tier down where her and the person who's essentially the office manager and doing a lot of project management, much too much, one might say, the two of them have a kind of monthly planning session for the whole kind of outlook of the month for the office and what we'll all be working on. So I guess it's kind of nice how there are these scales of stuff going on with all of it.
I'm just gonna ask, do they make that visual like a lot of
now? Yeah, so they were for themselves, and now they've switched to actually sharing it with us too. So it is essentially a sticky notes on the wall workload plan. And as of last month now, when we have our monthly full office meeting, we're all gonna get to see it, or we are getting to see it now. And so, which is really, at least for me, I like to know what's on the horizon. So it's really nice to, even knowing that it's going to change, because it always does, but having a sense of what that is for the next couple months, because I think they it's more accurate the closer to when they do it, and then they take it a couple months into the future. So yeah, so it is a visual, like looks like a Kanban kind of thing, but it's like, people with number of hours assigned to a project sticky notes. And yeah.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Actually, I'm really glad that we've switched toward making that public so that there's a bit more predictability.
Yeah, that's sort of our encouragement, is like, how do we make information as visually accessible, as quickly, understandable as possible. So great. Any other comments, questions, discussion on that? Hearing none, or waiting for people to unmute or pause.
I should ask something, but I don't know what.
Go ahead.
I'm just thinking here. I'm gonna ask something good if I have anything to ask.
So
actually, if you don't mind, maybe I'll ask you, Karen, actually, maybe what the biggest challenge you guys had at RPK because of the parallel architecture office stuff. I don't know if you don't, I hope you don't mind, but I'm just thinking like it would be interesting to hear another architecture office.
She had to log off, unfortunately.
Oh, that's okay. All right, well, that's fine. I should have noticed.
As Vel and I have been helping Karen and RPK, it's similar to yourselves. It's sort of building the habits, really, and I think that's been kind of perennial in every lean training opportunity, is encouraging the office or company to dedicate the time every week to say, this is your lean hour. So go try, practice, test, fail, fail faster, build, use something to really put into practice some of that lean culture building and ideas that really pull from others to create the flow and make it workable. So
that's a good reminder about that, though, because like we're not, we don't have any hour dedicated to this, so it would be a good reminder that we probably should.
Great. Our last ask of everyone today is to put down your takeaways and your plus deltas in the takeaway column. So again, use the plus button to add your comment. On stuff, and basically let us know also what we can do better. So maybe not schedule after a time change, but that's purely on me. I should, to be honest, I should have woken up a little earlier so I could have had that coffee to make myself.
Yeah, I did that, but then I turned on my alarm for another 15 minutes and then cut myself tight for getting here on time. That's fine. Getting into my living room on time. So, yeah.
So, we also have been learning from our deltas. So like I mentioned earlier, we are now recording our lean coffee sessions, and we're going to be building a nice, I guess, roster of talks to then share with others, and that way we can have a resource for our lean community of practice.